Chapter 6. The giants lived on Earth much more recently. 10 years ago, I wrote books on Atlantis, describing the antediluvian world we shared with giants. I showed how mythology around the world spoke of these titans and their clashes with humans, and how thousands of giant skeletons were unearthed in the 18th and 19th centuries. They were reported in local newspapers of the time. Skeletons were carried away and hidden by government-affiliated archaeological groups. In the United States, it was the Smithsonian Institute that was tasked with one of the greatest cover-ups of all time. As tedious of a read as it is, a book entitled The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America proves the cover-up beyond doubt. In my books, I said that the giants roamed the lands probably more than 12,000 years ago, before the Great Flood, and how that some of them survived the deluge with the very last of their species being eliminated a few hundred years ago. About this, I was wrong. I had been deceived because hundreds of books on ancient mysteries, such as those by Edgar Cayce, Graham Hancock, Zechariah Sitchin, Robert Bauval, Blavatsky, etc., speak of a time more than 10,000 years ago. Even religious folk place key events to thousands of years ago, and Darwinists say the first intelligent humans appeared 8,000 years ago. The giants are real, but the timelines are wrong. I have since learned events of both conventional history, quote-unquote, such as the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman empires, and also events of alternative history, such as the Great Flood or floods, dragons, and giants, are more recent. As you have read or heard in previous articles, at least 1,000 years have been added to the Middle Ages. That would mean that 1580 is really 580, 1840 is really 840, 1231 is actually 231, and so forth. And that's only the time theft that I know of. There could have been several more in prior ages. I won't expound here. If you wish to learn more, you can look into the phantom time hypothesis. I don't understand the details yet, but there seems to have been a series of cataclysmic events as recently as the 18th and 19th centuries. The most major reset seems to have happened around 1850. Slaves of the giants. There was a time giants enslaved humans, using them for forced labor and even as food. The Mesopotamian engraving of the giant god and goddess Utu and Inanna holding earthlings captive using a nose ring is one example. No doubt one of the less flattering moments in our history. A more recent illustration, if you will, from the 17th century, the Cornish story Jack the Giant Killer. Here a giant is seen holding humans as slaves. Mesopotamia dates back 5,000 years ago, and the medieval era of 500 years ago. Just one of many examples of correspondence between very ancient and fairly recent. Human enslavement. Is that why we have catastrophic events? Were we waging war against our slave masters? Who eradicated these giants? Why has their presence faded over the last few hundred years? Recent giants. And then there are giants who lived beside smaller humans in peace. I found a photo engraving of a funeral procession of Vicente Guerrero, made in 1833. He was the second president of Mexico. His funeral took place in Chulapam, Oaxaca, Mexico. In attendance are ecclesiastics, civilians, and giants. That it is a photo engraving means that it captures a reality of the time. Giants actually mingle with humans, and no big deal is made of it. And 1833 is recent, less than 200 years ago. That's your great-grandmother, who might have lived alongside giants. Another lithograph from 1830. The subtitle says, "Steppe Inhabitants of Asian Tartary." There are 2 giants and 2 smaller humans. The subtitle does not mention the giants. It just calls them and the 2 smaller humans steppe inhabitants, as if this were entirely normal. Giants were with us in the 1700s and 1800s through several revolutionary wars. Then came World War I. After that, the giants mostly disappeared. If there were any left, they were featured in circus shows. The theme of circus giants continued until after World War II, and after that, they disappeared from there. Is it possible that all of the revolutionary wars that were happening around the world at the time were a cover for the real war against the giants? These struggles for independence all happened at around the same time worldwide, as if coordinated. Some researchers have noted how they shared the same fashion designer, regardless of whether they were from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, or Russia. Here's an interesting image. Baptiste and Antoine Hugo from the late 1800s. They were called the Giants of the Alps and were featured in circus shows. In the black and white image in the book, they appear to be nearly twice as tall as the average humans standing with them. It's interesting to me that 1830s giants were treated as normal parts of everyday life, and 1880s giants were circus attractions. So what happened between 1830 and 1880 to create such a profound change in perception? I was searching for the earliest mention of giants as circus performers. I found Anna Swan from 1862. So in about 30 years, we went from living alongside giants, calling them inhabitants, to enslaving them as circus freaks. The first circus freak shows began in the 1840s, apparently. That's around the same time, according to previous articles, that massive cities sprang up seemingly out of nowhere, while others burned to the ground. Some researchers say that it was in the late 1840s that a great reset happened, meaning the old Earth was wiped away and given a fresh start. I never gave that theory much attention, but maybe it is true. There are a number of very interesting pictures in the book and the e-book. There is a drawing of an Irishman. His name was Charles Byrne, born in 1761, and his skeleton is still on display today in the Hunterian Museum in London. Much more can be found on the internet. You also find thousands of old newspaper articles on the skeletons of giants having been found. Here is one from July 13, 1908, in the Washington Times. Headline, "Giant Skeletons Found on Coast." It says contractors have unearthed the skeleton of a gigantic prehistoric man at Santa Monica Beach. The skeleton was over 9 feet in height. Hard work uncovered 13 more similar skeletons. Here is one from the New York Times, published February 11, 1902. Giant skeletons found. Archaeologists to send expedition to explore graveyards in New Mexico where bodies were unearthed. It talks about a burial ground near Mesa Rico, about 200 miles southeast of Las Vegas, that yielded skeletons of enormous size. Luciana Quintana, on whose ranch the ancient burial plot is located, discovered 2 stones. These were found in shallow excavations, the bones of a frame that could not have been less than 12 feet in length. The men who opened the grave say the forearm was 4 feet long, and that in a well-preserved jaw, the lower teeth ranged from the size of a hickory nut to that of the largest walnut in size. The chest of the being is reported as having a circumference of 7 feet. Quintana, who has uncovered many other burial places, expresses the opinion that perhaps thousands of skeletons of a race of giants long extinct will be found. This supposition is based on the traditions handed down from the early Spanish invasion that have detailed knowledge of the existence of a race of giants that inhabited the plains of what is now eastern New Mexico. Indian legends and carvings also from the same section indicate the existence of such a race. Were all of these skeletons unearthed during that time because the war against giants had been recent? Or was this a media campaign to make it look like they were more ancient? It's hard to tell from here. But they apparently lost the battle. Why would our governments go to such lengths to mask their reality? Or to conceal that they were defeated? To act like nothing happened? To re-script history? If they defeated the giants, why wouldn't they want to advertise and commemorate that? The religious scriptures say that the giants are the offspring of forbidden relations between angels and humans. Were they eradicated by the rulers of this realm? Thanks to our fake education system, we know very little about them or the circumstances of their disappearance. We are simply told giants didn't exist because they don't fit the Darwinist narrative. I remember specifically asking this question of a school teacher when I was young. She said those are Bible fairy tales. In school, we learn about the real things that can be proven by science. In folk tales, giants are presented as dumb, axe-wielding nomadic monsters that harass humans. On the other hand, the many large structures could be more easily explained with their help. These are not the works of brainless monsters. In the photos we do have from old times, they don't seem to differ from smaller humans except in size. If giants were much more recent, then that explains the gigantic doors we see on so many buildings ascribed to the Middle Ages. The Horned Giants. According to an article titled Giants, Bones, and Mound in the New York Times of July 14, 1916, archaeologists dug up the remains of horned giants in the Susquehanna Valley of Pennsylvania. According to the article, a Professor A.B. Skinner of the American Indian Museum and the Reverend George Donahue, Pennsylvania state historian, and Professor W.K. Moorhead of the Phillips Andover Academy discovered the burial mound with the remains of 68 people. They had the average height of 7 to 8 feet, 2.4 meters. On July 30th, only a few weeks later, Skinner wrote a retraction of the whole thing, again in the New York Times. As so often with cover-ups, several versions of the story began circulating. According to one, the whole thing was a prank. According to another, a disgruntled cook at the camp made the story up. Regardless of the story, they were telling the public that there are no skulls with horns, no people with horns, or anything like that. Fact-checkers, quote-unquote, today continue to insist that no such thing exists or was ever dug up. If there are ever any giants found anywhere, it's because of a disease called giantism. That's what they tell you. The truth? There are plenty of medieval drawings, paintings, and tales of giants and smaller humans with horns. Several are listed in the book. One such painting is a portrait of Margaretha van Eyck by Flemish painter Jan van Eyck, painted in 1439. She has small horns and a head covering. Is it possible that this fashion of the Middle Ages was meant to conceal real horns? Or that these are actual horns rather than a fashion? Are these our infamous reptilians disguised as humans? There are still people today that grow horns, but it's so rare that it's labeled cutaneous horn, and it's seen as some kind of disease or tumor. Dragons are much more recent. This whole ancient thing around dragons and serpents may also be much more recent than I thought. In fact, there is some link between serpents and giants. According to the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels landed on Mount Hermon. There they made a pact to have sex with humans. The offspring of the interactions created the giants. So, on one hand, we have Mesopotamian and Sumerian images of reptilian beings, elongated pointy heads, in some cases elongated nose and jaw, walking on two legs and feet. On the other hand, we have countless medieval drawings and paintings of reptilian beings interacting with or warring with humans. One image is dated 875, and it's from the British Library in London. It was apparently taken from a French legal codex. Dragons are both mentioned and pictured. Not bad for a creature that allegedly did not exist. Another image published is a 1526 painting by Dutch painter Pieter Bruegel. At first sight, there's nothing unusual about the painting. But with a magnifying glass, you see the painter has tucked in some other stuff that bypassed the censors of history. In one, people are riding on three animals that look like dinosaurs with long necks. If a painting like this were the only example of dragon-like creatures existing alongside humans, we could easily dismiss it. But there are plenty more. We find these because the fakers of history are not very thorough when it comes to scrubbing evidence. These creatures are not portrayed as the main feature, but as a casual side to the main feature of armed soldiers. And in case you're wondering why I would refer to dinosaurs as dragons, a reminder of something I posted on my Telegram channel a few months ago. It says, in my books on Atlantis, I say that the ancients around the world said dragons are real creatures. But later, science renamed them dinosaurs to account for all the dragon skeletons being dug up. They invented a history of millions of years before humans and called dragons mythical. The Wikipedia page on dinosaurs calls the ancients pre-scientific, as if they had no knowledge. There's a chapter in the biblical book of Daniel called Bel and the Dragon, B-E-L. It's not very well known because it's been removed from many modern Bibles. When parts of an ancient book are removed to appease modern preferences, it's mostly because it reveals some aspect of hidden history. The story is about people worshiping both Bel, which is an idol or statue, and a dragon. The book says that, contrary to Bel, the dragon is a real creature. The story compares the unreal, Bel, with the real, the dragon. The dragon is the real problem. Bel is the illusion that the dragon puts in front of people to divert from itself. The hero of the story, Daniel, gets rid of Bel by demonstrating that it is not Bel but humans who are receiving sacrificial offerings, and he gets rid of the dragon by slaying it. I can see why this story is absent in many modern Bibles. It's a stark reminder of the theme of humans slaying dragons, a story found across all cultures and in many folk legends around the world. It is a reminder that not so long ago these things were taken for granted as being real. Conclusion. I have always skipped the Middle Ages in my research. I had been taught that they were the Dark Ages and that nothing of interest happened in them. My school-indoctrinated mind thought of these times as royals versus peasants, the plague, Templars, the Inquisition going after witches, pirates and sailors discovering new land, etc. There didn't seem to be much data on what happened between the years 800 and 1500. Once I let go of my preconceptions and beliefs about these times, a whole new world opened up. I learned that this time period was so much more strange than we were led to believe.